Hello family. Welcome to Stories with Modi. Please subscribe and leave a like for us. It means the world to us. Also, share this video with your friends and loved ones. Turn on post notifications so you don't miss future videos from us. Thank you as you do so. Sit back and relax as we dive into the story. Naomi sat quietly by the window of Jerry's small apartment, her textbook sprawled across the table yet untouched. The dim glow from the kitchen light barely illuminated the room, but she didn't need much to see the frail figure lying on the couch. Jerry's breathing was shallow, his chest rose and fell with a labored rhythm that sent worry curling around Naomi's heart like a vice. She had spent her entire day at nursing school, balancing exams and clinical rotations, yet here she was, pulling an all-nighter at his side. The soft hum of the refrigerator was the only sound filling the space. Naomi glanced at the clock, 2:15 a.m., but she couldn't bring herself to leave. Sleep could wait. Jerry needed her more. Jerry's illness had crept in slowly at first, fatigue, dizziness, and a few missed days at work, but within months, his health had plummeted. His once vibrant, lively demeanor faded into quiet exhaustion. Doctors diagnosed him with kidney failure. Now the weight of his survival pressed heavily on both their shoulders. Naomi took the brunt of it willingly. She ran errands, attended appointments with him, and tried to keep his spirits high even when the prognosis grew grim. Jerry, despite his charm and affection, had become increasingly dependent on Naomi, and she didn't mind. She was in love, after all. It didn't matter if her classmates were out enjoying their weekends while she spent her evenings cooking bland, kidney-friendly meals. Her heart found fulfillment in his smile, even if it was fleeting. In his better moments, Jerry would tease Naomi about her intensity, calling her his personal guardian angel in scrubs. He admired her ambition, but rarely acknowledged the extent of her sacrifices. Naomi shrugged it off, believing love was meant to be selfless. It wasn't a burden, she told herself. It was a privilege to care for someone she loved. Yet, as the days blurred into weeks, Naomi couldn't shake the feeling that something fragile lingered beneath their bond. Something whispered of danger, but she silenced those thoughts, choosing instead to focus on what she could control, staying by Jerry's side, regardless of the toll it took on her. The sterile white walls of the hospital seemed to close in around Naomi as she sat beside Jerry in the examination room. The rhythmic tapping of her fingers against her knee betrayed her anxiety, though she kept her expression calm for Jerry's sake. He sat slouched beside her, pale and weary, his eyes barely able to meet hers. The door creaked open, and Dr. Benson entered, his expression unreadable. Naomi instinctively reached for Jerry's hand, her fingers tightening around his. The room felt too small, the air too heavy. Dr. Benson's words landed like weights in her lap. Jerry's condition had worsened. His kidneys were failing faster than anticipated, and the only solution now was a transplant. Naomi's heart skipped a beat, but she forced herself to stay composed, nodding as though she expected the news. In truth, the ground beneath her seemed to shake. Jerry stared blankly at the floor, his grip on Naomi's hand slackening. She could feel the defeat radiating off him, a quiet surrender in his eyes that she refused to accept. As Dr. Benson explained the transplant process and the agonizing wait for a donor, Naomi's mind began racing. The list was long. Jerry's health wouldn't hold up much longer without intervention. "Can I be tested as a match?" Naomi's voice cut through the room, surprising both Jerry and the doctor. Jerry's head snapped up, his brows furrowing in protest. "Naomi, no. You're still in school. You have your whole life ahead of you," he whispered, shaking his head. But Naomi silenced him with a glance, her resolve hardening. To her, there was no question. She couldn't watch the person she loved slip away while she did nothing. This was her chance to save him, and she would take it without hesitation. Later that evening, as they returned to Jerry's apartment, the weight of the diagnosis hung between them like an unspoken cloud. Naomi prepared dinner quietly, her mind occupied by thoughts of blood types and compatibility tests. Jerry barely touched his food, his appetite crushed by the day's events. Naomi knelt beside him after clearing the table, cupping his face gently. "I'm not losing you, Jerry," she whispered, pressing her forehead to his. Tears welled in his eyes, though he quickly wiped them away. Naomi didn't need grand gestures of gratitude. His life was thanks enough. Deep down, she knew the risks. Giving up a kidney wasn't a simple decision. But if it meant Jerry could have a second chance at life, then she wouldn't think twice. Naomi sat on the cold plastic chair of the hospital waiting room, her knee bouncing anxiously. She had completed all the required tests. Now it was just a matter of waiting for the results. The room buzzed with quiet murmurs from patients and their families, but Naomi felt detached, as though she existed in a bubble of her own thoughts. Jerry sat across from her, arms crossed, his eyes trained on the television that flickered in the corner. He hadn't spoken much since she insisted on being tested as a donor. Naomi understood his hesitation, but she wished he could see things from her perspective. To her, love was action. It was standing in the gap when the person you cared for couldn't stand alone. When Dr. Benson finally called them in, Naomi felt her heart leap to her throat. She clenched her fists to stop her hands from trembling. The doctor's expression was neutral, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes that gave Naomi hope. "You're a match," he announced, and Naomi exhaled in relief. Jerry let out a soft curse under his breath, but Naomi squeezed his hand reassuringly. "It's happening," she whispered, her voice filled with determination. Jerry shook his head, visibly torn between gratitude and guilt. "Naomi, you don't have to do this," he muttered for the 100th time. But Naomi's decision was final. "I want to," she said simply, her eyes unwavering. In the following weeks, Naomi found herself juggling school, work, and the preparations for surgery. Her parents were less than thrilled when she told them of her decision. Her mother's voice trembled with worry, asking if she fully understood the risks. Naomi assured them she did, but convincing them was harder than she anticipated. It wasn't just the physical aspect of losing a kidney, it was the long-term implications. But Naomi had no doubts. This was love in its truest form, and she was ready to face whatever lay ahead. As she lay in bed at night, listening to Jerry's shallow breathing beside her, Naomi felt a sense of quiet confidence. The transplant was scheduled, and soon Jerry's suffering would end. 3 weeks after the surgery, Naomi found herself bustling around Jerry's apartment, setting up balloons and laying out snacks for a small celebration. Jerry's recovery had been steady. His strength was returning with each passing day. Naomi still felt the occasional twinge from her own healing incision, but she brushed it off, focused on the brighter picture. Jerry was alive. That was all that mattered. His friends had gathered to mark the milestone, laughing and drinking as if the past few months had been nothing more than a distant memory. Naomi's smile never wavered, though exhaustion tugged at the corners of her mouth. She had organized the entire event by herself, using what little savings she had left. But the joy in Jerry's eyes made every effort worthwhile. Rose arrived fashionably late, her presence drawing attention the moment she walked in. Naomi noticed the way Jerry's eyes lingered on her longer than they should have. Rose was dazzling as always, her laughter echoing throughout the room. Naomi convinced herself it was nothing, that Jerry was simply grateful to be surrounded by friends again. After all, Rose was her best friend. They had been inseparable since high school, and Rose had been supportive throughout Jerry's illness. Naomi couldn't imagine any betrayal lurking beneath that friendship. Still, as the night wore on, she couldn't shake the sinking feeling that something had shifted, even if she couldn't put her finger on it. Later, as the guests trickled out, Jerry sat quietly beside Naomi on the couch, his arm draped lazily around her shoulders. He thanked her, kissing her temple softly, but there was an absence in his touch that hadn't been there before. Naomi brushed the thought away, blaming it on fatigue. As she helped him to bed that night, she told herself things would return to normal with time. She had saved Jerry's life. Their love had survived the storm. Surely this was just the calm afterward. But deep down, Naomi felt the first flicker of doubt, a tiny crack in the foundation of their relationship that she desperately tried to ignore. The weeks following Jerry's celebration brought a subtle but undeniable change in the atmosphere between him and Naomi. At first, it was easy for Naomi to rationalize the small shifts, missed calls, late responses, and postponed dates. Jerry had just returned to work after all. His life was slowly resuming normalcy, and she wanted to believe he was simply catching up with the world he had left behind during his illness. But as days stretched into weeks, Naomi found herself dining alone more often. Her texts lingered on read without reply. Jerry's once enthusiastic presence began to fade, replaced by brief conversations and hollow promises to spend time together. Naomi reassured herself that he just needed space, but in her heart, doubt began to fester. One evening, Naomi decided to surprise Jerry at his office. She spent the afternoon baking his favorite cookies, the scent filling her small apartment with warmth. Carrying the box carefully, she envisioned his wide smile and the soft kiss he would plant on her forehead. But when she arrived, Jerry's office was dark, confused. She lingered outside until she saw his car pulling into the lot, with Rose in the passenger seat. Naomi's stomach twisted painfully as they sat in the car, talking and laughing like they were the only two people in the world. Naomi wanted to believe it was innocent, but the way Rose touched Jerry's arm and the closeness between them told a different story. She stepped back into the shadows, clutching the box tighter as tears welled in her eyes. That night, Jerry didn't call. Naomi sat in silence, replaying the image over and over. She wanted to confront him, but fear held her back. What if she was wrong? What if accusing him only pushed him further away? As she lay in bed, her incision aching faintly beneath her fingertips, Naomi wondered if this was the price of love, giving everything, only to watch it slip through her fingers. The walls of her apartment felt colder, and for the first time since the surgery, Naomi felt profoundly alone. Determined to brush off her suspicions, Naomi threw herself into her studies and hospital shifts, attempting to distract her heart from the gnawing doubt. But the universe seemed intent on unraveling the delicate strings holding her relationship together. One afternoon, she overheard Rose laughing in the hospital cafeteria, her head tilted back as she whispered something to a mutual friend. Naomi's heart clenched at the mention of Jerry's name, followed by a sly smile from Rose. Though the words were distant, the implication was loud enough to echo in Naomi's chest. She knew better than to confront Rose in public, but the weight of her silence grew heavier with each passing day. Later that evening, Naomi sat across from Jerry at dinner, her appetite absent as she watched him scroll through his phone. She could feel the emotional distance stretching between them like an invisible wall she couldn't tear down. Finally, she exhaled and spoke softly. "Is there something you need to tell me, Jerry?" He glanced up, confusion flashing across his face before a forced smile appeared. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice light but evasive. Naomi hesitated for a moment, afraid of the answer she might receive. "I saw you with Rose at the office the other day. You two seem close." Jerry's expression hardened almost instantly, his posture shifted as he leaned back in his chair. "She's just helping out. You're overthinking things," he replied, his tone clipped. Naomi searched his face for sincerity, but all she found was the cold distance that had taken root over the past few months. Her chest tightened, but she nodded quietly, unwilling to push him further. That night, as Jerry left her apartment without a kiss or backward glance, Naomi stared at the door long after it closed, knowing deep down that their relationship was unraveling thread by painful thread. Naomi's worst fears crystallized one rainy evening when she decided to visit Jerry unexpectedly. The weight of uncertainty had become unbearable, suffocating her with every unanswered message and canceled plan. Clutching an umbrella, she stood outside his apartment building, rain trickling down her face as she hesitated at the door. When she finally gathered the courage to enter, her footsteps echoed in the silent hallway. The door was slightly ajar, and Naomi's heart thudded louder as she stepped inside. "Jerry," she called softly, but the sight that greeted her froze her in place. Jerry sat on the couch, Rose nestled beside him, her hand resting far too comfortably on his chest. The intimacy of the moment shattered Naomi's illusions. They both turned sharply at the sound of her voice, Jerry's face paling while Rose straightened, but made no attempt to move away. Naomi stood rooted to the floor, the betrayal sinking in like a dagger to her chest. "Naomi, it's not what it looks like," Jerry began, scrambling to his feet, but the words felt hollow, echoing off the walls with empty promises. Rose avoided Naomi's gaze, shame flickering across her face, but Naomi wasn't interested in her excuses. Tears burned in Naomi's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Her heart pounded fiercely, but she straightened her shoulders, swallowing the lump rising in her throat. "I gave you everything, Jerry. I gave you my kidney," she whispered, her voice trembling with restrained emotion. Jerry opened his mouth to speak, but found nothing to say. Naomi turned without another word, the weight of heartbreak pressing down with each step she took toward the door. By the time she stepped outside into the rain, she realized something important. Her love hadn't been enough to keep him, but it would be enough to rebuild herself. Naomi spent the days following Jerry's betrayal in a haze of disbelief and sorrow. The world outside her small apartment felt distant, almost like a movie she was forced to watch from behind a glass window. She kept the blinds drawn, letting darkness swallow the space she once filled with warmth and laughter. The weight of giving Jerry her kidney pressed heavily on her chest, and every glance in the mirror reminded her of the scar she bore for a man who no longer cared. The betrayal wasn't just a breakup, it was a dismantling of everything she had sacrificed and believed in. Rose, the friend she had trusted, was now inseparable from Jerry. Their relationship became the whispered gossip that echoed through the halls of the hospital where Naomi worked. Her absence didn't go unnoticed. Naomi skipped shifts at the hospital and ignored her professor's emails, letting assignments pile up like debris. Even the simple act of eating felt exhausting. She nibbled at crackers, but rarely finished a meal, her once vibrant figure now frail and fragile. The loneliness became a constant companion. No matter how much she tried to block out the world, her mind replayed Jerry's cold indifference and Rose's silent complicity over and over. Friends reached out, but Naomi withdrew further, unwilling to let anyone see the cracks splintering beneath her carefully guarded surface. She answered with short texts and excuses, hoping they would stop trying. In her solitude, she convinced herself that no one could understand the depth of her pain, but isolation came at a cost. One evening, after collapsing from exhaustion in her living room, Naomi lay on the floor for hours, too weak to move. Tears streamed silently down her cheeks as she realized the severity of her physical and emotional state. She wasn't just heartbroken, her body was suffering too. The organ she had sacrificed left her more vulnerable than she had imagined. If she didn't pull herself up soon, she feared she might never recover. It was this sobering thought that forced her to stand. Even as her knees trembled beneath her, Naomi shuffled to the bathroom and gazed at her reflection. Dark circles hollowed her eyes, and her skin looked pale, but deep beneath the surface, a flicker of resolve began to stir. She couldn't let this destroy her, not after everything she had endured. Returning to the hospital felt like stepping into a storm of hushed whispers and lingering stares. Naomi could feel the weight of everyone's gaze as she passed through the corridor, their conversations abruptly silencing the moment she appeared. Gossip about Jerry and Rose had spread quickly, and Naomi's absence only fueled the curiosity and pity that followed her every step. Nurses exchanged subtle glances, and some patients even whispered behind their hands, as if Naomi couldn't hear the soft murmurs trailing behind her. Though no one said it to her face, Naomi knew what they were thinking. The girl who gave everything and got nothing in return. The foolish girl who sacrificed her health for love, only to be discarded. The worst part wasn't the whispers, it was seeing Jerry and Rose together in the hospital, walking the same halls where Naomi once held Jerry's hand, praying for his recovery. Rose often leaned into him, her smile bright as if nothing had happened. Naomi forced herself to remain professional, but every